feed your mind, feed your body, and feed your soul. It's just intuitive to me. Get back to me in a week and tell me it's bullshit. You have to do something for someone else who cannot pay you back. If they pay you back, it's a transaction. If you give them a discount, it's a transaction. If they cannot pay you back, then it feeds your soul.
Just something that just came to mind is Adam Grant wrote a book about givers and takers. And I know you and I have had conversations around the giver and taker philosophy. Can you talk about that and how that's impacted you?
So I'll share an anecdote to illustrate the giving-taking paradigm. 1 year after my brother died, my sister called me and she was angry with me. I said, "Why are you angry with me?" And she said, "I'm angry with you because there's something wrong with you." And I said, "Well, what does that mean? What do you mean there's something wrong with me?" And she said, "Well, what's wrong with you is that I've been falling apart for a year and there's nothing wrong with you. So what's wrong with you is that there's nothing wrong with you, and that's weird. And so I'm angry with you." And I said to her, "Are you willing to follow my advice so you can stop being angry?" And she was skeptical. She didn't believe me. She said, "Okay, well,
How many
Frank,
years younger was she?
6 years younger. You know, there's the dynamic of the older
Yeah.
brother, and there's that dynamic." But she said, "Okay, well, I'll listen to your advice, and then I'll decide whether I'm going to follow it or not." I said, "Okay, well, every day, do 3 things: feed your mind, feed your body, and feed your soul. Feed your mind every day. Have an interesting conversation like you and I are having now, Charlie. Read a book, watch a film, feed your body, exercise almost every day. You know, maybe you're going to do it 6 days, 5 days, but you're going to exercise almost every day. And it doesn't matter what you do. You can go for a walk, you can rollerblade, you can go ice skating. It doesn't matter what you do, but you have to move. Your body has to move. You can do calisthenics. Okay. Feed your soul. So feed your mind, feed your body, feed your soul.
And you told her to do this for how long?
I told her to do this for her whole life. I said to her, "Well, try it for a week." I mean, you know, she may have said to me, "Well, how long have you been doing this?" And I said, "I've been doing this my whole life. Feed your body, feed your mind, feed your soul. It's just intuitive to me. So why don't you do that and get back to me in a week and tell me if it's bullshit. Let me know if you believe it." Okay. So what does she do? That week, every day she read, she'd watch a film, she'd talk with her husband. Every day she'd go rollerblading, and she volunteered at a cancer ward for children with cancer. She called me up a week later. "Frank, you're right. I didn't think you were right, but you're right. I now understand why you haven't fallen apart." And she told me what she did. And she says something very interesting. She said, "The one I was most skeptical about was to feed your soul." And I explained it to her this way. I said, the way you feed your soul is you have to do something for someone else who cannot pay you back. If they pay you back, it's a transaction. If you give them a discount, it's a transaction. If they cannot pay you back, and then it feeds your soul. So what she was the most skeptical about was she thought that when she went to the hospital, that she was there for the kids.
She would think of your brother. Yeah. She maintained that?
No.
No.
Well, she did for a year, and then she did it in a less disciplined way. It helped her. It helped her deal with the death of my brother. And it turned out that she thought she was there for the kids, but the kids were there for her.
Right. Right.
They made her happy.
She was helping them, serving others. But you and I have, I call you up and say, "Hey, Frank, do you know about, this person, or what do you think?" And you would say, "Oh, he's a giver, good person." But sometimes you'd say, "Hey, he's a taker," or sometimes say he's a I forget, he's a matcher, like tit for tat kind of person. And you tend to gravitate to givers because we're givers.
Yeah, and the world is a little more complicated than that, right? I mean, people can be
Right.
givers some of the time and not others. So I try and not be judgmental about it, but we all know a taker when we see them, right? So, sometimes people vacillate between matcher and giver, and that's
Right.
okay. I don't have a problem with that with anyone on that spectrum. I have a problem with people on the spectrum between matcher and taker. Those are the people I have a problem with. And the way I deal with that problem is I don't interact with them. I mean, once I've identified them, I just basically they don't exist to me.
You've taken care of your body, your mind. You never been a big alcohol person. You don't.
My nickname is Two Drink Frank.
Yeah. So tell me about how you keep and throughout your 20s till to now, you've kept your body and mind healthy.
Well, I think if you embrace the golden rule, and if you try and live by its principles, and if you exercise most days of the week,
And you were mostly a runner, right?
I was a runner for 40 years.
So you would jog and go out and run every
Yeah,
day.
I would run 5 to 7 days a week. I'd run 2 to 3 miles, 20 to 30 minutes. And then I did other things. I did push-ups and I would bench press but not heavyweight, just for muscle tone. I transitioned from running and I'm not a tall person. I'm 5'7".
Right.
I'm not a heavy person, so I was able to run for 40 years, but I'll be 62. When you hit 59, 60, your body starts to heal less quickly and so on. And
Right.
so I'm now a walker. So I now walk for 50 minutes. Instead of running for 20, I walk for 50 minutes. I did that this morning. I went walking for 50 minutes and I usually walk in the morning.
You also, you talk about win friend and influence people, Dale Carnegie. I can't remember any interaction with you where you haven't had a big smile. I mean, sometimes you're pensive in your thinking, but in general, you're smiling, you're happy, you're a joyful person. You radiate energy, and I don't know if that's the way you always were from a little kid, or is it something that you learned over time?
I think when I was younger, I was quieter. And my parents are refugees from Cuba. While they spoke English when they came to the United States on my freedom flights in 1962, we only spoke Spanish at home, even though they learned English because they learned English before they came to the United States. And they didn't want me to learn English with their accent. They had very strong accents in English. And so, because we only spoke Spanish at home, when I started kindergarten in Indianapolis, I didn't speak a word of English. And I think in the first few years of my life, because I didn't have a command of the English language, I tended to be a listener, and which later in life has helped to me because listening is an underrated skill. And when I listen very actively. Some people tune out what the other person is saying because they're busy preparing what they're going to say next. And I'm a very active listener. And I think I started to develop those skills when I was 5 because I had to figure out what the hell everybody was saying.
Right,
It
right,
didn't
right.
speak English. And now I learned English probably in 3 months, but my vocabulary over time became more extensive in English. And so in terms of radiating energy, I think what happened to me was, a series of evolutions where I was very quiet. I tended to be shy. I think the story I just told is one theory on why that was that evolution at that stage. And then as I got older, I
If
started
you're
to,
knocking on doors with your dad, I mean that takes courage too to be like knocking on doors and
well, I was
smiling at
I was
people.
watching my dad because I wasn't an
Right,
employee then. He would invite me and say, "Look, why don't you
right.
watch what I do?" And then I started to do it, but unofficially without being an employee. And then I said, "Oh, okay, well, this is a good way to make some money. It was better than working at the JCPenney gas station, which is
Right.
what JCPenney used to have gas stations. I used to work at the gas station, and this was better. And then I evolved from being kind of a listener and quiet and figuring out how to speak English, to then getting to high school, playing sports. I was a baseball player. That was my primary sport. I was a very bad player when I started. And by the time I was a teenager, I was an all-star. I made the junior varsity team at my high school, which was difficult because my high school won the state championship for many consecutive years in baseball. We were a sports dynasty. I didn't
Wow.
make it to the varsity team because a lot of those guys ended up becoming professional baseball players, and I was good, but I wasn't that good. And then when I was in 10th grade, I would challenge myself to do things that made me uncomfortable, and I was still relatively shy, but I ran for class president when I was a junior in high school. So I
Wow.
ran for class president and I won. I beat the incumbent. And then when
Wow.
I was a senior in high school, I ran for class president again as an incumbent because I was the junior class president.
Right.
But I ran against the most popular guy in high school who was the football quarterback. And I beat him. I'm not sure how I did that, but so I beat the football quarterback when I was a senior shot. And then I used to do the pep rallies. So this guy named Tim Gannon. Tim Gannon was this very colorful character who had a little radio show. So my high school had like a radio
Right.
platform with a radio show and a television closed circuit. And this guy was well known for doing that. And so he and I would do the pep rallies together. Um, and then another transformational moment for me was um, I was in law school and I didn't like law school. And my girlfriend at the time, who's my wife, who I've been with for 43 years, and she's a very important part of my life. And whatever glow you see, a lot of that is emanating because of the special relationship that I have with her. She's my best friend. She's the smartest person I've ever met. And so when I was in law school, my relationship with Kelly with an N, had become complicated. I wasn't happy in law school. She wasn't happy in law school. When you're not happy, it's hard to be happy with who you're with. And we're both stubborn, so we stuck it out. We never broke up, but it was hard. It was a very complicated time in a relationship. And I made a decision after my second year of law school that instead of starting to work, so when a lot of students who were in law school in the summer, they work a summer clerkship, and my wife and I had summer clerkships after every summer. And I had a clerkship at the same firm that I clerked at after my first year, firm that at the time was called Steele Hector and Davis. And I talked to the managing partner because I had already worked there one summer. And I said, hey, thanks for giving me an offer to work again the second summer after my second year. And I'm going to travel and ride trains in Europe for a month. I'm going by myself. Ellen didn't want to go with me. And he said, yeah, sure. So instead of working for 3 months, you're going to work for two. We'll pay you for the 2 months you work. So you can work July and August, and in June, have fun in Europe. And so that European trip was one of the most transformational experiences of my life because it forced me out of my tendency to be shy. And anyone who's known me for the last 40 years would never describe me as shy. I'm the opposite of that. But that I was very shy until I was in my mid-20s. Very shy. Um, and in Europe, when you're shy and you're by yourself and you're there for a month and you don't know anybody, it gets really lonely. And so it and then I figured out that to avoid being lonely, I could just start talking to people and nothing bad happened. Right?
That's great.
Because I think sometimes when you're shy, you're afraid you're gonna say the wrong thing, you're afraid you're not gonna be interesting, or I'm not quite sure what the mindset was, but I was very shy. Even though I had forced myself to run for class president and I did the pep rallies and right, these are not things that a shy person usually does. But then the real transformation happened when I took this trip to Europe, and it took me a few days. I mean, I remember being in the French Riviera in Cannes, sitting on a seawall, surrounded by beauty, and I was lonely. And I made the decision on that seawall that was going to stop. And if I was on a train, or I'll give you an anecdote, right? So I'm on a train. I'm going from Salzburg to Vienna. I'm in Austria at this point. So I made
Right.
myself, I worked myself all the way from England. I'm now in Austria. I've been riding trains for a long time, right? And sometimes I would stand in between the trains. I used to have a backpack. I had a little pack in the front, like students use in college, to balance me. And my luggage was my backpack. And I would stand in between the trains because it was fresh air. And I'm standing in between the trains, and there's this Austrian guy. And he was such a joyful guy. So we're about to get to where he's going to get off. And I say to the guy, "You're the happiest guy that I've ever met." And he starts crying. And I'm in my mid 20s. I had spent most of my time being shy. For many weeks now, I had been doing this sort of thing of just randomly talking to people. This guy starts crying, right? And so I say, "Well, what's wrong?" And he says, "Well, my father is dying." And he said he was visiting him in the hospital, and he hugs me and he puts money in my pocket. And I say, "What's that for?" And he says, "When you get to Vienna, you're going to arrive at a train station. And most people don't know that at the top of this train station is a beer garden. And that beer garden has the best views in all of Vienna. And when you get to the train station, I want you to take that money that I just gave you, and I want you to invite someone to a beer, and I want you to do a toast to me and my father."
Wow. And how did you find somebody? Like, how did you pick somebody to do that with?
So I walk out of the train and I see a young couple. I introduce myself. I tell them this story. They accept my invitation. They were from Vienna. They lived it. They were Austrian. They spoke English. And a lot of Europeans speak fluent English. And we go up to the beer garden. It had the best views of Vienna. And Vienna is beautiful because all the roofs are made of copper, and all the copper has turned green over hundreds of years. Back during this story, which was 40 years ago, there were no high rises in Vienna. I mean, the tallest buildings were 2-3 stories. I'm in the beer garden of the train station looking down on all of this beauty. And so I invite them for a beer. And guess what happens after we have our beer? They invite me to dinner. And so I had experiences like this for 3 weeks. So I had that 1 week where I was
Lonely.
lonely because I'm by myself. And then I start to put myself out there, and I had a lot of cool experience. I just gave you one of many anecdotes of experiences that I had.
I want to ask you about when you were hitchhiking in Greece. We'll save that one
Well,
for another.
I was hitchhiking in Italy,
Italy.
in a beach town in Italy. Yeah. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I got picked up by somebody who wanted to give me more than a ride.
So, but you were an adventure, and you just put yourself out there, and the synchronicity of life just put interesting people in front of you, and then that lesson transformed you in a way that you were just fearless from just meeting people and
And
seeing
that
what the
started in
universe.
Europe. It started in Europe.